In deadlock detection, we let the deadlock occur, right? And then we actually check whether the deadlock is present or not, right? So that is the situation, fine. So before we go for that, let us go through the avoidance advantages, right? So in case of avoidance, the first advantage is it is not necessary to preempt and roll back the processes as in the deadlock detection. Because in deadlock detection, what you need to do? First, you need to find out whether deadlock is present or not, right? If it is present, then what do? We have to roll back the processes. We have to roll back the processes. While in this case, where we are putting the constraint, what is the main point of this avoidance strategy? Either you don't start the process, right? That is the first approach we have seen. Either you don't start the process unless it is causing problem, right? Or the second issue which we discussed in bankers is you constrain the resources, right? Yes, resource allocation. You put a constraint on the resource allocation. That is the second approach, fine. But we don't roll back the processes, right? So the time and effort will be saved. Okay. It is less restrictive than deadlock prevention. Why so? In deadlock prevention, what was the strategy? Can anyone remember and recall? Yes. What was the strategy of deadlock prevention? That was the first strategy that we have seen. It is very restrictive strategy, right? Deadlock prevention. Yes, right. We either try to prevent the circular wait, that is, we directly attack the system by preventing circular wait, or you go with hold and wait, or what are the other two conditions? Anyone remembers that? Hold and wait, circular wait, where the last two? Which are the first two? Mutual exclusion and which is still missing? No preemption. That's correct, right? So either if you go with indirect approach, you try to prevent any one of the first three conditions, right? You try to prevent any one of the first three conditions, or you go direct, hit it directly by preventing circular wait, right? So over there is a lot of restriction because we are actually modifying the OS policy. Mutual exclusion ideally cannot be prevented, as we discussed, right? So deadlock prevention is actually a very restrictive policy, while deadlock avoidance is less restrictive. So do you agree with this slide? What are the advantages mentioned on this slide? Right? Okay. Now we'll see the disadvantages, or you can say restrictions, right? As I said, bankers is a most popular approach, so we should not say disadvantages, but still there are some restrictions. The first is we are going in with an assumption. What is the assumption we use? Maximum resources must be declared when a process begins, right? Now, every process does not know that, right? So again, you might have to use some estimation algorithm, right, to estimate, or you can do like this. That is, you look at past behavior of similar process, right, and see how many resources it required. And based on that past behavior, you predict the number of resources for this process, right? So some kind of machine learning, right, or data mining you can apply over here, right? So that is one of the approach, right? Another is we are assuming that there are fixed number of resources available, right? So you can't add a resource at runtime, right? So why we are going with this assumption again? Because we are relying on the mathematics of calculation, right? You are maintaining the matrices and vectors initially, right? And they have to be pre-populated, right? You can't change the resource values at runtime, because if that happens, your calculation will be violated, right? So Banker's algorithm will not hold in that situation, right? But if you go with these two assumptions, then Banker's is a well-to-do algorithm, right? There is no major issue with that, right? Is that fine? What are the restrictions with Bankers, or in general deadlock avoidance, right? Okay. Now let us look at deadlock detection, right? Again, we have a comparison, prevention versus detection over here. small difference. Matrix and vectors are of fixed size. No, they are just declared as per the programming language, Assignish. But basically, the number of resources cannot be changed at runtime. That is the assumption, right? Matrix and vectors can be handled in the programming language either dynamically or statically. You all know that, right? But main thing over here is we can't add resources at runtime. Okay, fine. So prevention strategies are conservative, right? Because we are limiting the access to resources as well as we are imposing restrictions on the processes, right? Deadlock detection works in an opposite manner. There is no restriction. That is the first thing, right? Grant your request as and when possible, right? And what should be the possibility condition for granting the resource request? What is the obvious condition that we need to check? Yes, you just compare with your available resources, right? If resources are available, don't think of anything else, go ahead with the allocation, right? So actually, we are not doing pre-processing, right? You are just checking, you are just doing a simple comparison. Compare your request with available, right? If it is less than equal to available, go ahead, right? As simple as that, fine. And then periodically, you check for the deadlock situation, right? Periodically, you check for the deadlock situation, right? So it allows deadlocks to occur. That's correct, Urjit, right? That is why it is called deadlock detection, right? So after allocation, we will periodically, let us say you set a timeline, that is after every 2 hours, 3 hours, right? It depends upon the algorithm that you are using. You check and you run the deadlock detection algorithm, right? If deadlock detection gives you yes, that means if deadlock is present, then you need to handle it, right? Otherwise, you can continue, right? There are only two possibilities. Is that fine? The approach, right? We do the allocation as and when possible. Second step, we regularly check for the deadlock, right? Now, how frequently we should do that? We'll have a detailed discussion on that later, right? Okay. Let us look at the algorithm now. As I said, it is almost similar to your bankers. Just the data structure names are little bit modified and minor difference, right? We have. So again, we go with allocation matrix and available vector, right? As we had. What allocation metric defines? It gives you a snapshot of current allocation, right? At this point of time, T is equal to X. How many resources are occupied by which processes, right? It is N cross M matrix, where N is what? Processes, M is types of resources, right? Okay, and as we know, there can be multiples of same types of resources, right? Suppose you have 3 IO channels, right? So the value will be 3, okay? We have seen that example, fine. Next is available vector that defines your current availability at this point of time, okay? Now, we use or we maintain a separate data structure that is called request matrix. So at this, T is equal to X, how many requests we have received from each process, right? So you can compare this with which other data structure we have seen in previous case in bankers. Is there any comparison possible, first of all? Yes, with an array. Yes, in that case, we are having request as an array, right? Over here, we are maintaining request as a matrix because we are focusing on multiple processes. Are you getting the difference? Right? If you remember, last time when we ended yesterday, we had seen the resource request algorithm, right? Where you were requesting in form of an array as a vector. And then you were checking whether that request leads to deadlock. If it was leading to deadlock, what we do? We block the process, right? Otherwise, you let it go through, okay? So that was the process we followed. Over here, we are using request as a matrix, okay? Where each Q of ij, what I will be over here? Can you tell me? In Q of ij, what will be I? It defines process, right? And what is J? It is resource, right? It is very easy to understand, right? We have seen this similar example. So that's why I said this is a very simple algorithm to understand, right? Okay. Now the important part is, before you start, unmark all processes, right, that are not deadlocked, right? Initially, we assume that no process is deadlocked when we start, right? So we will unmark, or you can say you will cross over each process, okay? So that is the first step with which we will begin. Let us see what happens next. Mark each process that has a row in the allocation matrix of all zeros, right? So if a process is not allocated any resources, can it play any part in this process? Can it be a part of deadlock situation? Obviously not, right? So we discard them basically. We assume that that process is free from deadlock. Because what is the basic deadlock situation where it leads to deadlock? Hold and wait, right? You are holding one resource and you are requesting the other. That leads to the deadlock ideally, right? If a process is not allocated anything, we give it a free hand, right? So that is the first step. Next step, like we did, work is equal to available in previous algorithm. Over here we have W, right? So we initialize a temporary vector W equal to available vector. Same step, W is equal to available, right? Now we will find similarity between this and the bankers. Let us see. Find an index I, that means find such a process which is currently unmarked. That means it has been allocated some resources, right? And the ith row of Q is less than or equal to W. What does that mean? Yes. What ith row will define? Request. What this means is request of that process can be fulfilled with current available resources. Are you getting this? Right? Yes, surely I'll repeat. Request of current process, which I'm looking at, right, can be fulfilled with currently available resources, right? If request can be fulfilled, can I imagine that that process can be completed? Yes, Rishi and Urjit, right? So that's what we go with. Okay, so it's a simple mathematics like we did in bankers, right? We were comparing the same way. So you can see this Q of Ik is less than or equal to W of K. That means request for K resources is less than or equal to W of K. That means you have enough resources which can fulfill this process. Okay. Now, if no such row is found, that means if you cannot fulfill any of the requests with current available, what is the only option or what is the only possibility we may have? Yes. If you can't fulfill any of the process, right, request using current available, what does that mean? Then stop. That said, and why we are stopping? That is correct. We are stopping, right? But why we are stopping? That is important. There is deadlock, right? Because that process might be waiting for the resources, right, which are not available at present. Okay, so that is the crux of this algorithm. Yes, insufficient resources. That's correct, right? Otherwise, what should we do? Tell me. If you can find a process whose request can be fulfilled, what you will do? Like we did in bankers. What did we do in bankers? Simulate, right? Or allocate, right? And go ahead. Over here, we don't have simulation. We actually go with allocation because this is deadlock detection algorithm, right? Okay. If such row is found, that means, yes, surely, I'll repeat, Priyank. In first step, we are marking each process that has a row in allocation matrix of all 0. That means if your process is not allocated anything, can it play part in the deadlock situation? Yes, that's correct, Keval. So Priyank, are you clear with that? Can it take part in the deadlock situation? No, right? That is the answer. And that is why we discard that process. We consider that that process is not going to take part in my calculation. Okay, so we will mark it with a tick. I'll show you the way to solve this example. I already have a solved example, right? So that we will see later, right? Once we complete this algorithm. Okay, fine. If you find a process whose request can be fulfilled, now what do? Execute that process, right? That is, mark the process I and add the corresponding row of allocation matrix to W. So what we are doing over here? Updating the available vector, right? Updating the available vector. Is that clear to all? This step, W of K will be W of, it is just like that. Work is equal to work plus available, right? Just the notation. See, every algorithm has been found by a different scientist, right? So they have used different notation, right? Concept remains similar, right? Okay. Return to what? Step number 3. So what do I need to do? Keep checking for other processes. That means with updated available, can I fulfill the other pending requests? Are you getting this point? Right? If still it is not possible, what will do? Yes, we can summarize that a deadlock exists if and only if there are unmarked processes at the end. Okay? And each unmarked process is deadlock process. Right? Clear with this algorithm, so that we can go with the example, right? It is, as I said, most of the part is same as, okay, why to use algorithm when we can detect it by resource allocation graph? That's a good question, Urjit. But see, resource allocation graph can give you the idea if the number of processes are limited. But you imagine the current scenario where we are having at least 100 processes. Can you look at that graph and find out the deadlock? It won't be possible, right? If you even think about software engineering, which we studied, right? Are we drawing the DFDs beyond level 6 or 7? No, right? So that is the concept, right? We try to keep the things simple, right? So that is why resource allocation graph is a good way to detect if there are less number of processes, right? But in a real life situation, it is very high. Yes, exactly. By increasing the processes, that to understand the diagram is difficult, as well as to draw it is again another difficulty, right? So that's why it is not used. It is just used as a notation, right, to depict examples, right? Okay. So let me just share that example with you. Can you see that handwritten note? Yes. Okay. So given 4 vectors, right? Sorry, 2 vectors and 2 matrices. We are given request matrix, right? That is the first thing. We are given the allocation matrix, right? That is A, right? And we are also given allocation is given, request is given, resource vector is given, and available is given, right? What should we start with? What is the first step? Find out a row in allocation matrix which is having all zeros. Do we have that situation? Yes, P4, right? So initially we start like this, right? This is my first step. See this, right? Initially I will unmark each process. That is, I'll put a cross, right? And then I check that is there any row which is having no allocated resources? If yes, then I mark P4. Are you clear up to this step? P4 is marked, right? Step number 1 done. Okay. Step number 2 says initialize a W with available, right? So I'm setting W is equal to 4 zeros and 1 because that is given over here, right? Okay. Now check with W, can we grant any of the request? If we start in a sequence, you check with P1, right? Can P1 request can be granted? It is requiring 0, 1, 0, 0, 1. Can we grant that with current available? No, right? Can we grant P2? No, again not, right? Directly P3, that's correct, right? Because it is having the exact requirement, okay? What do we need to do next? Let P3 complete, okay? Let P3 complete and get the allocated resources. What P3 is containing? One of R4, one instance of R4, right? It is having one that is over here. You can see this, right? So what will be your next available? Updated available vector. It was this 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. Now one instance of R4 will be added, right? So it is 0, 0, 0, 1, 1. Check again. Check again. With 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, can I fulfill P1? No. Right? Can I fulfill P2? No again, right? What about P3? Already completed. What about P4? It is already unmarked, so we are not considering, right? We are not considering, right? So that means you cannot complete either P1 or P2, right? So that means deadlock is present between P1 and P2. You can even see that practically, right? Because what P1 is waiting for? What P1 is waiting for? One resource of type R2. Who is holding that? Look at the allocation. Who is holding that? P2, right? What P2 is waiting for? One instance of R3. And who is holding that? P1. So actually, we don't need to look at the algorithm itself, right? But again, this is one simple example, right? In examinations, we can solve simple examples, but in real scenario, this data structure's length will be very huge because there are hundreds of processes present, right? So are you clear with the approach? Right? We have solved the example within, I think, 1 or 1.5 minutes, right? So it does not take much time, right? Let us go through the process, right? As I said, first you unmark all processes, right? Then you check zeros, right? If you are having a row of zeros, mark that process. That's what we have done over here. Then we initialize the W with this value, okay? Then we check P1's request can be granted? No, right? So P1 can't be granted. Same for P2, right? P3 can be granted, right? So now what do we do is update W. So W becomes this, right? And the P3 and P4 both are marked, right? So only thing left is P1 and P2. Check once again. Still, we are not able to grant P1 or P3. Hence, we can derive that P1 and P2 are deadlocked. Okay. So again, I'm asking, are you clear with this deadlock detection algorithm? Resource vector is not useful in this situation. That's correct. Right? But that you will be checking where? Initially, isn't it? Right? Because you need to compare with the number of resources you are having, right? You can't request more than the resources in the system, right? That is always going to stay. I hope you agree with that, Keval. Right? So that is why resource is generally given in this situation. Okay, fine. So I'll upload this PDF also, and you can try more examples, right, from your exercise of textbook, or you can find many GATE questions based on this. Right? In GATE, deadlock detection and bankers are very popular questions. Right? You will get a number of examples asked in different twisted manner. Right? So try to solve them. You will find it interesting. Right? Okay. Now let us continue with the next part. So this example we have solved. Right? Now let us summarize. Right? So when should we check for the deadlock? Right? That is the question. how frequently, right? If I go with very high frequency, let us say after every 30 minutes that my system is running, if I check for the deadlock situation, right, that can be a very costly operation, right? Because you have to run the algorithm and your CPU will be occupied, right? Time consuming as well, right? So what is a better approach? If you check with each resource request, that means as soon as one request is granted, you check for the deadlock, right? So this is again a very costly operation, yes or no? Because every time you will get, if not hundreds, at least tens of requests, right? At least 10 to 15 requests you are going to get at the same time. So in that scenario, what will happen is your system will be more occupied on checking for the deadlock rather than doing the actual execution. Yes. So that is the problem that you might face, right? But still, what is the advantage over here? Early detection. That means instead of detecting after a large period, if you are detecting after every request, right, there will be less cost of recovery, right? Because right now two processes might be in deadlock situation. Later on, if you check, that two might increase to 5 or 6, isn't it? So actually, you might have to roll back 6 processes if you check it late. Agreed? Right? So that is a, you can say, trade-off that we are having over here. If you go with frequent checking, it consumes a lot of CPU time, but it gives you early detection, right? So there is a trade-off which we need to balance. Okay. Otherwise, we can use estimation, right? So as it is written over here, it depends upon how likely deadlock occurs. So you look at the past behavior of the same process, or you look at the past behavior of similar process, right? And then see how frequently deadlock was occurring, right? And if you assume that deadlock is occurring after every 2 hours, let us say, right? So you can put a checkpoint. That is, at 1 hour 45 minutes, you will run this algorithm. That is one approach you can try. Yes or no? Seems practical, right? But it does not guarantee again, right? So that is again a trade-off over here. Okay. So we need to pick either very frequently or less frequently. You have only two options, right? You need to find out an average deadlock occurrence time. And at that point of time, you should check. Okay. Fine. Now we still have time, so let us cover recovery strategies. Then I'll go with the next topic, right? So once deadlock is detected, what are the options we have, right? Like in database, you have studied the transaction can be rolled back, right? Over here we have processes. So there are different approaches we have, right? The standard approach that is used, okay, where is the history of deadlock processes maintained? There is a data structure for that, right? That OS maintains separately, right? It is not assigned a name specifically, but OS knows the location where it is maintaining all these things, right? Or another ways, it can also mark that in the process table, right? In process table, you can have an entry where this can be maintained. With late strategy, deadlock will be less detected. That's correct, Saini. So there is a trade-off always, right? So that is correct, right? Okay. So what is the best strategy without having too much logic? What we can do is abort all, right? But where abort all can be applicable? Where the number of processes deadlocked are less, right? What if there are 10 processes in deadlock situation, right? Then the cost will be very high, right? If it is 2, yes, we can go with this technique, but still, this is actually the most popular technique, right? Because it is simple, right? What is the second approach? Yes, that's correct, Preet. Backup each deadlock process to some previously defined checkpoint, right? So you roll back that process, right, to previous checkpoint and restart, right? Restart the other process, restart all processes actually, right? So in this case, can we reach the same point where the deadlock was occurring? If I'm rolling back to previous checkpoint, what is the probability that we might not reach the same situation? Is it possible that you will still arrive at the same position where you were earlier? Same position means deadlock situation. Is it possible? Even after rolling back to previous point, you can still reach the same deadlock situation. That's what I'm saying, right? So this is not going to guarantee that checkpointing works. Okay. Again, we rely on the luck, right? It does not happen. Yes, deadlock situation can reoccur. That is a problem with this second strategy, right? So backing up is not the solution. What is the only option we have? Abort, right? So what is the abort strategy that will incur less cost, right? That is the third one. Okay. Successively abort deadlock processes. That is, if you find that P1, P3, and P4 are deadlocked, right? You start with P1, abort P1, check, right? What do I need to check? Run deadlock detection once again. Are you following the process, right? First, I have found that P1, P3, and P4 are deadlocked, for example. So what I'll do is, I will abort P1, okay? I will run detection once again with P1 aborted, okay? Still, if deadlock is present, I will abort P3, right? And so on. Following this strategy, right? So, okay, at that time, the resources may be free from other process as the process is restarted later. Yes, that's correct. So that is why the second strategy is not efficient. Agree with you, Ujit, right? So it's better to go with the third one, right? What is the other option that we have? Instead of aborting the processes, yes, there is less chance. Agreed, right? There is less chance, but there is still a chance that you might reach a position where deadlock is going to again occur, right? And that is why aborting the process is the best possible solution, ideally, right? Okay. Fourth one, if you don't abort processes, what is the only option you have? We only have two things which we can take away. Either process can be taken out or resource can be taken out. So the fourth option says that successively preempt resources until deadlock no longer exists. But when this strategy is applicable, under which assumption? Yes. If you are having hold and wait, can we go with this strategy? If hold and wait has to be followed, then what hold and wait says? You are holding that resource until you get the other one, right? If that condition has to be satisfied, can we apply this strategy? Can we preempt that resource from the process? You can't, right? Because hold and wait is holding, right? That means if R1 is allocated to P1, it is not going to release it, right? So actually you will have to break hold and wait. Then only this strategy is possible. Are you following? Right? So actually this method has a dependency of whatever conditions we have seen earlier, right? There are so many details that are there in the present in the background. Okay, fine. So what is your opinion? Tell me, which one of the strategy is incurring, let us say, average cost and it is efficient also? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Yes. Third, right? Successively aborting until the deadlock no longer exists, right? Fourth is again not very suitable when there is yes, agreed, right? So that's what I said. If you can't preempt, that is not applicable, right? No preemption. If that is there, then it is not possible. So yes, the third one, right? Which is the worst? Which is the worst? 1, 2, and 3 out of that, choose. Ideally, first one has to be the worst because it requires maximum cost, right? You will have to restart all the processes, right? So a lot of CPU time. So what if that process was waiting on the last line, right? It called for that resource just in the last part of the code. All 80% of the code executed successfully. Just in 20% you are stuck, right? So all those 80% computation has to be done once again, right? This applies to all processes, right? So these are deadlock recovery strategies, right? So are you clear with this, right? Fine, fine. Now we have an interesting problem to discuss. Again, I'll discuss the brief. Yes, definitely. It will happen in the third also. Agreed, right? So no strategy is 100% accurate, right? And that is why a lot of research work is still going on in the OS domain, right? And that is why you are getting new OS variants or versions from every time and then, right? OS is never ending topic, right? It is going to go a long way, right? Okay. Let us understand this topic. It is a deadlock's classical example, right? Suppose there are 5 philosophers in a house. Their job is just to think and eat. Right? They do just two things, right? Either they are thinking or they are eating. Okay, and you can see there is a circular table, right? And what they eat is a spaghetti, right? That is noodles. Okay, that requires forks. Okay, and there is a constraint that you require 2 forks to eat. Every time you require 2 forks to eat, right? So where deadlock is possible in this situation? Consider there are 5 philosophers. Okay, 5 seats are available, 5 forks are available, 5 plates are available. Think and give me the answer. Where deadlock is possible? Worst case scenario. When 3 or more wants to eat at a time, yes. And can anyone tell me the generic situation? Yes. Right? So basically, what if all 5 philosophers are hungry at the same time, right? A rare occurrence, but it is possible, right? They will sit on the table at the same time and everyone picks up their left fork, right? And they will fight for the right one. Okay, so that is a deadlock situation. This is a classical example of deadlock, right? That is called dining philosopher's problem. Like producer consumer is a classical example of mutual exclusion. Dining philosopher's problem is a classical example of deadlock situation, right? Let us look at the approach, right? So I've already explained this, so I'm not going in this, right? No philosopher must starve to death, literally, right? We need to find out that solution. That starvation should not occur as well as deadlock should be avoided, right? What is the simplest solution we can go with? Yes. The simplest solution is, yes, either you allow first or at least keep 1 fork free. Can it avoid deadlock? If I'm keeping 1 fork free, what does that mean? At least one philosopher can eat, isn't it? If at least one can eat, then one after he completes eating, he will give 2 forks, right? So the others can continue. Are you getting the solution? Right? So you try to keep at least 1 fork free at a time, right? He is going to get one, right? But the other one he should be able to get. Yes, Janil, that's what I'm saying. If everyone picks up the left one, right? But if 1 fork is kept free, right? Then at least one of them will get the second fork, right? So in that case, at least one will be able to eat and the process continues. Okay. So what is the simplest solution is, in terms of non-technical way, what we can say is, wherever there is a dining room, keep a gatekeeper, right? You have a gatekeeper outside that should allow only 4 philosophers to enter the dining room at a time, right? In that situation, what will happen? If you allow only 4 philosophers to enter the dining area, then what is the after effect of that? They will be picking their left fork, that is okay, but at least one fork is free. So at least one can start eating, although others have to wait, but they will not be starving out, right? No one is going to eat forever, right? That's what we assume. Okay, so that is one possible solution, and that is given by semaphores again, right? Okay, so this is a simple way, right, that we can go with. This is a simple algorithm, right? This can lead to deadlock. Just observe this solution for a while. Think, then wait for left fork, that is fork of I. Wait for the right fork. Why we are having mode 5 over here? Yes, then rather than making other 3 wait for second fork, why don't we let 2? Yes, that is also possible, Rishi. Agree with that solution. Correct. This is one possible solution. That's what I said, right? Yes, at a time, if you allow 2, then 2 can eat. That is the best case actually, right? But what if all are hungry at the same time and they want to enter the room, right? In that case, you will have to at least let 4 in, so that after first finishes, the remaining will get chance, right? That is the approach that we use. Okay. So yes, it is not the optimal solution, agreed, but this is one possible solution proposed by semaphores, right? Okay. Why we are having this mode 5? That was my question. Because it is circular table, that's correct, right? So we are waiting for the left fork. If I get the left fork, I will get the right fork. Okay. If you imagine same weight operations over here, are you getting that idea? Right? There are 2 same weight calls. Okay. Then if you get both the forks, you start eating. Right? That is critical section. This is your critical section, right? Then you signal. That means you release the right fork first, release the left fork next. Okay. Then the others can enter. Okay. This is just a pseudocode, right? You can even write the program over here, right? Okay. So as I said, in this case, is deadlock possible still? Is deadlock possible still? The answer is yes. Why it is so? Because what if every philosopher calls the first wait? What will happen in that situation? Yes. Every philosopher picks up left fork. That is the meaning, right? Nobody will be able to get the right fork, right? So yes, starvation and as well as deadlock is you can say present, right? So what is the solution, right? We can go with this, right? Have another semaphore room whose value is 4, okay? And then see what we are doing. Wait on room. So what is this going to do? Decrement room semaphore. It is 4, so it will become 3, right? Until what? This call will be successful? Until semaphore value reaches 0. That means how many philosophers can pick up their left fork successfully? 4. That's correct. And 1 fork will be free. Agreed? 1 fork will be free. So this is one possible solution given by OS designers, right? I'll be happy if you can find out the optimal solution, right? In the lab session, you can try that out. Okay, we are going to do this in one of the labs. Okay, so are you clear with this? What is dining philosopher's problem, where the deadlock occurs, and what is the solution, right? So we have many interesting problems like this, right? Dining philosopher is one of them. There is one more problem called barber shop, right? In barber shop, you have a number of chairs where the customers keep coming, right? And there is also possibility of deadlock or starvation in the barber shop, right? That is a real life example, but that is applicable to OS design, right? So in lab, we are going to discuss that. Readers, writers, and barbershop, I'll discuss in the lab because the concept is more or less same, right? Okay, so we are done with the deadlock now. Chapter number 6 is completed from your textbook. Okay, ostrich algorithm, Unix uses. So why this all is needed in Unix OS? Yes, ostrich is one of the approach, it is using, but we should know the basics, and that is why we are covering all these concepts, right? Yes, it is for distributed. That's correct. It is. That is why I said it is one of the approach, right? Yes. So let us move now to next topic, right? I'm going directly to chapter 11 because chapter 7 and 8 are about memory management. That we are going to focus on in the entire third sessional phase, where we'll discuss the memory management, virtual memory, all those concepts, right? As you are fresh with scheduling, so that's why I'm taking chapter 11 first, because over here we have scheduling approaches, right? Before that, today in the next 10 minutes, we'll have a look at how IO management works, right? And tomorrow I'll be covering disk scheduling policies, right? They are almost same what you have studied. 9 and 10, yes. Chapter 9 is about scheduling that you have studied, right, in the first sessional phase. 10 is actually advanced scheduling that we don't cover in the bachelor's program, because over there, the examples of Windows and Unix scheduling algorithms are given, and we don't have enough time to cover those concepts, right? So that's why we don't cover that as a part of BTech program, right? So that is, so we'll be covering 7 and 8 in the third sessional phase, right? So let us start with IO management. IO management is a very difficult area. Why so? Because there are number of IO devices possible, and every device has a different requirement, right? So what are the different requirements of the IO device? Let us look into that, right? IO devices differ in the data rate. Some IO devices are fast, some IO devices are slow, some have average speed, right? It also depends upon application, right? If you are working with a runtime application, your IO device has to be working in a fast manner. If you're working with a background process, IO device can work in a slow manner, right? It also depends upon complexity of control. That means the logic with which that IO device works, right? That also decides the factor. Unit of transfer. Now, either you transfer your data block by block, or you transfer in a sequential manner. Can you give me the example of block by block transfer device that you are currently using? Yes. What I mean is you are transferring from main memory to secondary memory, or you are transferring from IO device to main memory, right? Can be anything. Yes, disk. Or your pen drives, USB drives, right? They are block devices, right? So you divide the whole area in blocks, and you transfer one block at a time or multiple blocks at a time, depends upon the channel capacity you are having, right? What is the example of continuous flow of data? You are using that right now, your monitors, keyboard, mouse, right? All these are character-oriented devices where the data is continuously flowing. So it also depends how you are building, how you are handling the data, right? So unit of transfer is also a factor. Next is representation. So how your data is represented in an encoded format or in original format, right? It all depends upon that. If your data is converted into such a form which can be transferred quickly, like binary, right? As you know, binary can be transferred very quickly, right? That will be beneficial, right? So there are so many factors, even error conditions, right? Every device has different error conditions, right? So you can imagine how complex this area is, right? How complex the algorithms can be, right? For IO management. From this chapter, we are going to cover only two topics. The first is IO buffering, that is this, and the second is scheduling algorithms, okay? So the other topics, some of them you have already studied in CSA. So that we are not keeping in syllabus. Only two topics from chapter 11. IO buffering is the first one. Second is disk scheduling algorithms. right? Because that is a part of OS. Fine. Some of the part you already studied in CSA, as I said, right? So that's why I'm not going for that. Okay. So let us continue. Processes, data transfer standard like USB 3.0 can also affect. That's correct, Preet, right? So what is buffering, right? Whenever you are reading from an IO device, are you going to read the data directly into the process, or you store that data into buffers and then you take that data? What is recommended? Ideally, you will go with buffering technique, right? So what are the different ways of having buffer? That's what we are going to see, right? So generally it is efficient to perform input transfers in advance, right? Why it is beneficial to perform input transfer in advance? So that we can avoid delay. That's correct, right? Your next data which you require is already there in the buffer, right? So your speed can get increased, okay? As well as the write operations should be done in a delayed manner. Why so? Because write operations are again costly operation. You have to talk with your disk, right? So ideally you should do that in a batch manner or in a periodic manner. Okay, so based on that, we have a buffering concept. Okay, so let us continue. So if you are going with block-oriented buffering, let us see what are the situations. In block-oriented buffering, information is maintained in form of fixed size block. As I said, it is used for disk or USB, okay? And we transfer one block at a time or multiple block at a time depending upon capacity of your hardware, okay? The second buffering way is stream-oriented buffering, right? So in this case, we are transferring as a stream of bytes, okay? This is used for terminals, printers, communication ports, pointing devices, right? As I said, okay? So the simplest strategy is go without any buffer, right? Older OS was using this, right? What is the problem in this situation? You can see there is no buffer allocated in the OS part, right? So your data comes directly from IO device through OS to the process. So what is the problem? It is one-way communication. That is one valid point, yes. But what is the other issue that might occur? Waiting, isn't it? Unless that IO device is responding, you have to wait, okay? Because otherwise what you would have done, if there was a buffer over here, right? You give that request, IO device will populate the buffer, and until that, your process can do something else. Or at least you can block that process and give chance to the other process, right? This can be possible, okay? So no buffering is not efficient, right? Look at this method now. If you have a single buffer for IO request, remember, it is single buffer for IO request. Then what is the advantage? Yes, that's correct, Harsh. You will be wasting time, right, in that situation. What is the advantage of having a single buffer? You give the IO request, right? Now, until that IO device populates the buffer, right? The process can either get blocked or it can do something else. And wherever the data is required, sorry, whenever, not wherever, whenever the data is required, what you can do? You can bring it in, this operation, right? So actually, yes, you can decouple this part with this part, agreed? Right? That is the advantage of single buffer. So what if we have two buffers, right? Further advantage? Yes. So every system has utilized different situations, right? Either it is single buffer or it can be also this double buffer, right? Let me discuss this slide first, and then in the next class, that is tomorrow, I'll go with the remaining topics, right? This will be the last slide. If I'm going with two buffers, see what kind of behavior this is giving me. Populate means you read the data into the buffer, right? read the data into buffer. Multiple buffer approach can be costly in terms of allocation. That's correct. But you will get faster data transfer, right? So there is an advantage also, right? Can you see switch over here? Right? It is just like switching. Okay. So what you are doing over here is one buffer can be used for what? For reading the input data, right? And while the first buffer is getting the input data, whatever is stored in the second buffer, I can start reading. So I can actually process two buffers in one cycle, right? Are you getting this situation? Right? That is why these arrows are given. It is acting like switches. First you are reading over here, then your switch will shift over here. You will read from here, right? This switch also is also movable. So if two buffers are giving you advantage, can we have two process access for double buffer? No, that won't be possible because you are having a private buffering system, right? Otherwise you will have the same problem of synchronization and all those, right? Yes. So what is the optimal solution further than this? With that point, I'll stop. Just give me an option. Yes. If two buffers are giving you advantage, why not go with a bunch of buffers for each process? And that is known as circular buffer system, right? Just have a look at this. I'll discuss this tomorrow, don't worry. But in circular buffer, we are having a batch of buffers available so that your process and IO device can work at almost similar speed. You will see minimum lag, right? You will see minimum lag, right? Yes, there is a cost of memory allocation. There is a problem of fetching. Yes, agreed, right? But the advantage is very large in this situation, right? So we'll discuss this tomorrow, okay? Let us end this session today. Yes, it is high concurrency. Okay, so thank you for joining. Let us end for today. Tomorrow I'll continue, and tomorrow we'll discuss these scheduling policies. So please refresh your scheduling algorithms. We'll see some similar algorithms like that, right?